Boker Tov, good morning to everyone, right here in Rechavia, Nachlaot, in Yerushalayim, and abroad. Thank you so much for joining us at 9:30 this morning in order to be able to continue to learn this amazing concept of Havaya and Elokim. Yesterday, we talked about the idea of two opposite characteristics of giving and withholding, withdrawing at the same time. And the example that the Rebbe Rashab gave was of a teacher, specifically a Chacham Gadol, a very wise person, trying to relate a very deep concept to a small child. And so there's a need to have a mashal, very often to have a need to have a metaphor, and through the metaphor is able to relate this concept to the student. So in order to explain this, before we go on in the text, I want to introduce a concept which I once gave a whole lecture on. It was actually on Shavuot night, a few years ago. And the idea is as follows. I was trying to explain, and I'm going to do it in short, and Bezrat Hashem, at another opportunity, we'll be able to expand on it more. But the way Hashem gave the Torah, and I'm going to explain this in a moment, is kind of like an upside-down pyramid. It starts with a concept which is very, very small. But in this concept is hidden something much deeper. And in that deeper concept, you have something which is much, much deeper. So let's start. The best example is from the Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 Commandments. Hashem gave us the Torah. But in the beginning, Hashem didn't give us the Torah. At Har Sinai, we got the two luchot, the two tablets, which were engraved in them the 10 commandments. The Aseret HaDibrot. Now, in the Aseret HaDibrot, you have really the entire Torah. All of the Torah is alluded to within the Aseret HaDibrot, within the 10 Commandments. That's the entire Torah is the entire five Sefarim of Moshe Rabbeinu, Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Now, you have your thinking caps on? Within the entire Chamisha Chumshei Torah, you have the entire Nach, the prophets and the scriptures. Now, the entire Tanakh is the written Torah. Within the written Torah, we have the entire oral Torah, which starts with the Mishnah. Within the Mishnah, you have the Talmud. Within the Talmud, you have all of the interpretations of Rashi and the Rashba and the Tosfot and the great tzaddikim that wrote commentaries on the Talmud. And upon these commentaries, we have other commentaries which explain what they're trying to say. And this is unlimited. The Torah is Rechava mini yam. It's broader than any sea, than any ocean, which is unlimited. When Mashiach comes, we're going to learn the Torah Toshel Mashiach, the Torah, the teachings of Mashiach, which are the deepest teachings, and they'll all be revealed. And there's Ein Sof. There's no end. There's no limit to the intensity of the depth of the Torah. Now let's go back for a moment to the 10 Commandments, Aseret HaDibrot. The Aseret HaDibrot include within themselves the entire Torah, as we said earlier, which are the mitzvot aseh, the positive mitzvot, and the mitzvot lo taseh, and the prohibitive mitzvot. Now, we can zoom in, no pun intended, we can narrow in to the first 2 commandments. Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am Hashem your God. And v'lo yeh lecha, you should not have any God, any strange God besides for Hashem. Hashem is the only God. So in the first commandment, we have in a sense, all positive commandments. And in the second commandment, which is lo yeh lecha, we should not have another God besides for Hashem, is alluding to that all of the prohibitive commandments. Now, if I want to narrow in even more, in the first commandment, I am Hashem your God, is alluded all of the commandments, including the prohibitive commandments. Because if you believe that Hashem is your God, you listen to everything. Not only the positive things, but also the prohibitive things he tells you to refrain from. Now let's narrow in even more. The first word of the Aseret HaDibrot is Anochi. Anochi, I am. Hashem says, I am. So the moment that Hashem says, I am, so you got to listen to everything that he says. Even, let's narrow in even more. The Aleph, the first letter. It's the first letter of the alphabet. So in the first letter, you have alluded the entire Torah, everything. And you want to go even deeper, even narrow and even more, in the verse, Vayidaber Elokim et kol hadvarim ha'ele leimor, we have alluded the entire Torah, even in the introduction to the Aseret HaDibrot. We're not going to get now into the details of explaining how and where each thing is alluded to, but at least one thing we know. In short, in the first letter of the Aseret HaDibrot, you have the entire Torah. You have the first commandment, you have both first two commandments, you have all 10 commandments, you have the entire Torah, the entire Chamisha Chumshei Torah, you have the entire Nach. Once you have the entire Tanakh, you pretty much have the entire oral Torah, which includes the Mishnah, the Talmud, Rashi, Tosfot, Rambam, all the amazing tzaddikim. We have the Zohar, the Baal Shem Tov, the Rebbe, all the greatest tzaddikim. All of their Torahs are all alluded to in that Aleph. I just said in 4 or 5 minutes what we taught for an hour and a half. It's an amazing concept. But what is the idea that I'm trying to bring across? Is that you can look at every scenario at its essence, or you can look at it as the quote-unquote revelation, more of an external part of it. And the truth is that when you look at the two major parts of the Torah, we have the Nigla, the Torah, the revealed part of the Torah, and the Nister, the Torah, the hidden part of the Torah. So any way you cut the cake, the view of the Torah is that the Torah has an inner part and has a revealed part. It's important to learn both parts. They're both part of the same Torah. But you can choose to peel away, not God forbid that it's bad, but there are some peels that are good. Some people eat orange peels. They say that the peel of the lemon is very, very healthy. It has all kinds of minerals and all kinds of healthy things inside. So it doesn't have to be that a peel is bad per se. It could be a peel is just something which is the right protective thing which covers over the etzem, over the essence, over the pnimiyut. So hopefully this is going to be a great introduction to what the Rebbe Rashab, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, is going to say now. He's going to talk about mainly the Mishnah and the Talmud. But I wanted to give you more of a general picture that this is a pattern of the entire Torah. Okay, so let's look now into the text, if you have the text. In the last lesson, we learned about this concept, about that even when you have a mashal, a metaphor, nevertheless, the etzem, the essence of the concept is enclosed inside the mashal. So it's almost like the analogy is there in its entirety. It's just that you may not see it because it's wrapped up in a very cozy, perfect, custom-made mashal metaphor. Let's continue inside. Ukemo Mishnah, and just like the idea of a Mishnah, Sheshana Lanu Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Our holy Rebbe, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, about 2,000 years ago, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he's called affectionately, we call him Rabbeinu HaKadosh, our holy Rebbe. He was the one who wrote the Mishnah. He lived at the end of the period of the Tanaim, those that wrote the Mishnah, the authors of the Mishnah, and he brought everything together and wrote it down. And so, how did Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi write it? Harei zeh hakitzur mikol arichut hapilpul v'haomek orech v'rochav shehaya etzlam b'hainyan. The idea shanu lanu kol zeh Rabbeinu HaKadosh b'lashon haMishnah b'kitzur nimratz. Rabbeinu HaKadosh took all of the lengthy explanations and discussions that the different tzaddikim and tanaim had in the yeshivas for the course of over 400 years, and he made it very condensed, very concise. It's almost like Shulchan Aruch, halacha. In this case, this is the halacha. Rabbi Meir said this. Rabbi Gamliel said this, and so on and so forth. Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai. Just the facts. He didn't go into all of the lengthy, deep discussions and conversations between the great tzaddikim. Up until his time, everyone remembered everything, but he was afraid that it would be forgotten. So he did the minimum, and he condensed all of the great discussions into factual small mishnahs, short mishnahs. That we should be able to receive it. Otherwise, if he gave it to us the way it was, we would probably be blown away. Omnam, however, be'emet, yesh b'lashon ha'mishnah, kol omek orech v'rochav pnimiyut v'atzmiyut chachmatam. We have the entire depth and breadth and length of the discussions of the great tzaddikim that formed the Mishnah. But when a regular person looks into the Mishnah, you don't really notice all of the discussions. Afterwards, you look into the Gemara, into the Talmud, Pratei Lashon HaMishnah, the details of the Mishnah, V'omek orech v'rochav, with the depth, length, and breadth. U'b'ha'mishnah u'b'helen. In the Mishnah, it's concealed. So, for example, the era of the Mishnah was about 400 or 500 years, and then there was the era of the Talmud, also for about 400 or 500 years. And so you can have a small Mishnah, which is 3 or 4 lines, and then you have a Talmud explanations. It could be sometimes several pages, double-sided pages. And so every letter in the Mishnah is exact. And the rabbis, the Amoraim, the authors of the Talmud, namely Rav Ashi and Marbar Rav Ashi, who wrote down the Talmud at the end of the era of the authors of the Talmud, what they had to do is they had to write down the explanations at much greater length. No pun intended, but I think the Rebbe Rashab is a great example for this. We're learning, he is teaching us what it means to take a concept and to break it down and to explain it at great length. That's exactly where Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber, the Rebbe Rashab, is so super professional at this. To be able to bring down a deep concept into details, that we should be able to understand it. So if you just take the Mishnah itself, you'll get the translation of the words per se, but the depth, probably, if we don't do the Talmud, if you don't learn the Gemara, they probably will miss all of that depth. And so therefore, it's important that we learn the Talmud, because the Talmud dissects the Mishnah and tells us why the rabbis learned this letter and not that letter. And in essence, what does the Mishnah do? The Mishnah does the same thing to the Chumash. Takes a verse, or takes a word, or takes a mitzvah, and says, look, it says in the Torah, this word or that letter. So because the Torah, every detail in the Torah is exact, so from the fact that Hashem decided to write this word and not another word, proves a certain point. And this is something which keeps on developing, something which becomes deeper and deeper and broader from many different perspectives and angles. Kamo Kain, same thing is similarly, hu b'hashpa'at hasechel. When you have this intellect which becomes delivered, shamashpia malim b'hashefa kol omek chochmato. The teacher condenses in his deliverance all the depth of his wisdom. Ela shehu ne'ela me'hamekabel. It's only that it's hidden from the receiver. So it's like we talked about in the last class about mati, velo mati, reaching and not reaching, pushing the stroller or the carriage and down the hill, but also holding it back. So are you giving or are you restraining? D, all of the above is correct. So even in the deliverance, you also have the essence of the intellect, even though you're really withdrawing and holding it back at the same time. And what shines in a revealed way? Is the external part of the intellect, of the wisdom. What is according to the kalim, the tools of the receiver. This ability in the teacher to be able to balance, both to give, to deliver, and also to restrain, to withhold, that comes from these two powers in the koach hamaskil, like we learned several days ago. The power, the thinking power, which is even way before it comes into the person's brain. Even before you can identify that this is the delivering power and this is the restraining power. It's all back there, it's all up there in the koach hamaskil of the teacher. And because he has both of these characteristics, that gives him the ability to be able to relate the information in a way that the receiver should be able, the student should be able to receive. Thank you so much for joining us today. Bezrat Hashem will continue this concept tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing you here. All the best.